Hey, Mark Walsh here. So this is a look at COVID times kind of 2.0, particularly the emotional, psychological, stress, trauma, and how that relates to politics and wellness really in the modern world. So I see a lot of sort of medical stuff on COVID. This isn't that, okay? So I'm not giving medical advice of any kind. And I also see a lot of sort of political narrative, which is really interesting and given what's going on, needed, but often not bringing together the psychological, the emotional, sociological, political, particularly around stress and trauma. And that's my area. So that's what this video is going to do. It's going to lay out the current situation we're in, some of the factors that may be invisible, some of the factors that just kind of need naming, and what to do about that in the current climate. So that's what's coming up in this video. I should probably introduce myself. If you have seen my stuff before, skip ahead 2 minutes. Okay, so my name is Mark. I run a psychology training company called Embodiment Unlimited. I come from a background of martial arts, also humanitarian work in areas of conflict. So I've sort of studied and worked with stress, both in sort of corporate environments like teaching stress management, also very practically, like on top of abseil towers and climbing towers, where I used to work with kids, and very practically in areas of conflict. So for example, I met my wife in Ukraine, I've worked in Sierra Leone, Afghanistan, I lived in East Africa, lived in the slums of Brazil. I have, written books on this. This has been my work for years and years and years, particularly around stress and trauma. I've also worked extensively in Russia and Israel. So those both countries I've spent a lot of time in. And I've really seen how this can impact cultures, not just psychologies. So that's kind of what's happening to us. So it's pretty relevant. I also founded the Embodiment Conference, which we did last year. During the sort of the year of COVID, we launched the largest conference that had ever happened for body-mind teachers. This word embodiment just covers yoga, meditation, martial arts, dance, body therapy, just covers all that. So I've listened to literally hundreds of teachers on this topic. I also hosted something called the Plague Dialogues last year, where I got many of the best body-mind teachers in the world together to talk about these kind of issues I'm going to sort of do an update on today. And yes, I'm pretty well placed in terms of sort of talking to all the different teachers in the field. I also did a project for doctors and nurses on stress last year called COVID Calm. I've got family in the medical services. So, that's a little bit about me and where I'm coming from. Okay, so a couple of disclaimers here. So as I said, this video isn't content about medical, is COVID all a conspiracy, or should you, how to not catch it, or whether you should wear masks or gloves or anything like that. That's not my qualification, okay? So this is more like the social, emotional stuff that needs to be viewed alongside that is the best way I look at it. It's like, let's see all the perspectives. Let's take into account some of the psychological, sociological, political costs of some of these more medical things. For what it's worth, I think there's sort of a scale from sort of full conspiracy people that say it's all complete nonsense to sort of absolute conformity, believing everything you're told in the media. For what it's worth, my own position is somewhere in the middle, wherever that is. I certainly have some doubts about things that are going on. For example, I get told that so many millions of people have COVID, yet I hardly know any. I certainly have doubts about what I'm seeing in terms of evidence-based and some of the numbers. But equally, I have family inside the National Health Service. I've had friends whose parents have died of COVID. It's clearly not nothing. But as I said, in any event, that's not what this video is about. This video is about looking at the body-mind implications, some of the other stuff that's there. Okay, so a quick look at my notes. In some ways, this has almost become sort of unsayable stuff. And in the current polarized, kind of combative and conformist climate, some of the stuff I'm going to say is quite tricky to say, and I think that in itself is interesting. I hope this is fairly balanced and, not from any extreme. Okay, all right, why now? Well, I think when this stuff kicked off, I responded quite quickly. As I said, from my background, it was fairly obvious some of the stuff that was happening, some of the things I'd seen, studied, particularly in traumatic populations, traumatized places. But at the time, everyone was so reactive, it didn't really land. And I think there's been a sort of sense making that's taken a while. And I think also now as things become, the new normal, as they say, as things become settled in, become normalized, I think we do need to challenge them. We do need to ask some questions as to, is it worth it? Is this thing that, maybe medically valid, is it worth this consequence? So, that's really what I want to provide to people who aren't experts in body mind field in this video. Okay. Yeah, basics, fight or flight. So if you're a sort of body mind person, you know all this, but this is worth reviewing for the rest of us. So we have a natural physiological mechanism called fight, flight, freeze. Sometimes fight, flight, freeze, fold form. There's various versions. You've probably heard of it. You've all been in it. You've all been tense in the shoulders after a hard day's work. You've noticed your breathing tense up, your muscles. Maybe it's these wrinkles or these wrinkles. The jaw gets tense for some people. Yeah, this physiological basis of this cortisol, adrenaline, different neurotransmitters, etc., etc. This is a natural fight or flight response that our ancestors developed, may have been quite good for sort of running away from tigers or fighting them or freezing and, hoping they go away. However, in the modern context, not particularly adaptive. Why is that? Well, in a nutshell, it makes us stupid, it makes us mean, and it makes us conservative. Let me say what I mean by that. We lose some of our sort of neocortical function. We lose some of our rationality as what's called the lizard brain sometimes takes over, as it were, the amygdala hijack. This is sometimes called. It's very basic neuroscience, excuse me if you're an expert in that. So we get dumb. We all know what this is like. We also get a bit mean. So you've all been in a bad mood and said something you regret. Later on, you felt bad about it. Your morality, your ethics, your empathy and compassion came back online. You were sort of temporarily a little bit psychopathic. Oops. Then you came back online and you went, you know what, honey, I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have raised my voice, or I shouldn't have said that mean thing about you being fat or whatever it was. Okay, never say that. So we actually lose our ethics, we lose our morality, we lose our empathy, our ability to connect with others. Interestingly, connecting with others also reduces this fight or flight. It's our primary mechanism of what's called self-regulation, is social regulation. So we are social animals like dogs or horses. We're more like that than cats. I like cats, but we're not so much like them. In that we're pack animals, we're social animals. Being excluded from the group is very threatening. We regulate with other people. So when a baby cries, we don't say, hey, here's a yoga exercise. We pick it up, we hold it, we talk to it, we move with it, movement, tonality, we let it see our face, we breathe with it, we calm it down. We use the regulation of the caregiver to regulate the child. That's called co-regulation. It's the basic way we calm the fuck down, okay? And that's important, so we're not stupid, we're not mean, I forgot the third one, we lose our creativity. So people become more conservative with a small c, meaning they contract to that which they have learned the longest, that which is sort of, imagine the neuronal pathways are sort of more deeply ingrained. Anything new, anything creative goes out the window. Okay, so this is the sort of psychology of fight or flight. Obviously, it has physiological effects on us. It deeply affects the nervous system, digestion, the psychosomatic stuff, blah, 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 blah. But basically, it screws us up. It's not very good for us psychologically or socially. It makes it hard to connect with others. It makes it hard to empathize. It makes it hard to think. So fight or flight, not a great thing. We would call that probably just stress in the Western world if it was ongoing. If it became more extreme or more permanent, usually that's called trauma. So this is one of those words that's really bandied around a lot these days. I was traumatized, I couldn't get any chocolate. No, you weren't, you were disappointed. Anyway, so trauma is this fight or flight gets, we could say, stuck in our system. So it becomes normalized. So that might be, as someone who's had PTSD, both from an alcoholic family growing up and from working in war zones later on, I know what it's like to wake up and feel like you've had 10 espressos before you've got out of bed, to have that fight or flight, your heart's racing, it might lead to hypervigilance. So this is kind of where you're like watching everything. I remember when I was in the slumbers of Brazil, I was very on edge like that. It might lead to lots of psychological symptoms, which we're going to talk about how they affect human beings. So for example, black and white thinking. This is one we're really seeing in the world today. So black and white thinking is like polarization. It's either this or this. There's no grey area. Either you're a COVID conspiracy nut or you have to believe everything the government says. There's no in between. There's no space to debate. There's no space to discuss. It's black or white. So you can think of trauma as the sense of safety has been smashed. It's the best way to think of it. The sense of trust in the world has been smashed. That's happened for many people in the last year. Okay, so instead of just having a little bit of stress, like, oh, my boss shouted at me, now I'm stressed, instead of that, it's this basic sense of the smashing of trust. The world is no longer a safe place. Therefore, I need to control the world. Yeah, so think of it, those of you who are more kind of at ease with the world, life's a good place, life's safe, things go your way. How would it be different psychologically and socially if you fundamentally, and this can be unconscious, it's in the body as much as a belief, that the world is unsafe and people can't be trusted, okay? So now it's kind of everyone's in this mode, right? As one of my Russian colleagues says, because trauma can become culturally normalized, meaning you don't have to personally be traumatized if you're just around a lot of other people who are, like, in Israel or Russia, for example, places of Afghanistan, places I've lived and worked. Once that becomes culturally normal, then everyone has it, okay? So it's just something that you can think of culture as like the shared body, the shared influence. So yes, we empathize, but we also pick up other people's stress. You may have experienced this when you're like, I don't know, if you ever sat on the train next to someone who's really stressed and they're on their computer and you can feel it, right? It's why we like being around calm people. They chill us out. Yeah, we co-regulate. Unconsciously, bodies spread. It's like bodies are infectious in that way. So if you're around a whole load of people who are mildly anxious because of COVID, or maybe even more anxious because they've watched the news, or more anxious because they've lost their job and they're worried about money, or more anxious because they don't like the way politics is going, we'll come to how these all collide, you pick that up. So even if you yourself are like, I'm not worried about COVID, I'm fit and healthy, I don't believe in it, whatever, you're still going to be picking that up. And obviously, we'll look at those factors that mean you'll pick it up more or less. It will become culturally normalized to be in that fight or flight response of everyone being defensive, agitated, aggressive, and this primitive, conservative. I don't mean right wing by that, because you could be very conservative about being on the left, right? We see that a lot these days, the authoritarian left. So you become, maybe authoritarian is a better way of thinking about it. When the world is unsafe, we want to control it to feel safe. It's like if you can't control yourself, you have to control the world, yeah? So those people who've been traumatized often become control freaks of some kind, or authoritarian, or very obedient, okay? So this is the sort of, we could say, the fawn response to trauma is, if I just do what I'm told, if I just go in the shop this way and out this way, and I have to be exactly 2 meters, and I have to wear the mask, and even if the evidence base is or isn't suggesting it, and I'm not having an opinion on that, it's not my expertise, that conformity can create safety. It's almost like the illusion of safety, it's like when you're on the airplane, they're telling you, what to do if the plane falls out of the sky to survive, no, die, that's what you're doing. It's the denial of death in many ways that we're looking at. And this is a psychological theme. There's whole psychologists who've built their career on the denial of death. Most people in the Western world, unless they've had jobs like I've had, are in denial of their own mortality. This is at the root of so much. We hide death away. We don't talk about it. We hide old people away. It's not like if you're living in East Africa and you're walking over dead people in the street, you can't avoid it there. And that, actually is a bad thing, because it means we don't live life fully. And the denial of death, like, we can save everyone, we can save everyone from dying. No, you can't. That denial of death, I think, is at the heart of what's been going on as well. We live in a culture which has become effectively soft. So there's many theories of cultural evolution that they go through stages. The Romans had these. It's basically, what is it, sort of the strong people create the good times create the soft people create the bad times. Many theorists would now say culturally we're on the last part of that. We've become decadent. There's many features that show we are in decline as a civilization. There's books on this that are fascinating. Things like celebrity chefs, the Romans had those, like really specific things. Anyway, slight side issue. So we may be in this sort of declining, slightly weak culture, which even more denies death, because, we're so comfortable, aren't we? We're so comfortable that we're a generation really that, my choice is like, do I have couscous or, organic quinoa? We're so spoiled that anything existential which has suddenly been presented to people, it just makes people shut down and goes into that hyper conformist, if I just do what I'm told, then I'm gonna be okay. That's really part of what's going on here. Now, of course, this is where you start to get political. The powers that be, whether they be churches, fascist dictators in the 1940s, modern governments, media, whatever, they love fear. Why do they love fear? Okay, because when people are afraid, they are more conformist. You could offer them a solution. Now, David Icke and all these conspiracy guys, often, I don't think lizard people run the world. But one thing some of them got right is this idea that authoritarian regimes, governments, people, whether it's a school teacher, it could be on a micro level, fear makes people conform, particularly if you say, well, you know what, you're going to die unless you do this, unless you do what you're told, unless you follow these rules, right? So those rules may or may not be completely sensible, completely justified. Again, not my expertise. However, the psychology is my expertise, and that's clear that when people are scared, they're more obedient. It's as simple as that. When people are scared, they're more likely to offer the solutions, and they're more willing to accept authoritarian measures when they're afraid. This is just like psychological facts, okay? This isn't political at this point, But we see how it ties into politics. Whatever you're left or right or center or whatever, okay, for what it's worth, I'm sort of center left on most things for what it's worth. A bit of variety. Where was I? So the politics there, the fear makes people more obedient. It leans people towards more authoritarian, whether it's authoritarian left or authoritarian right. It's not really the critical distinction. So powers that be do love populations that are scared. This is just the reality. And even if it wasn't like engineered as a conspiracy, of course they're going to take advantage of that. People take advantage of situations. You don't have to sort of posit some huge, global lizard man conspiracy to see that that's what happens when people have power and they have people who are afraid. Okay, so fear makes people afraid. When it becomes normalized and widespread as a culture, which is what's happened over the last year, okay, little pockets have sort of been almost infected by it, similar to when I've been in Israel, for example, which traditionally has very conservative governments, despite having some very liberal people there. Russia, again, very conservative government, Putin, the strong man who will lead us and save us and keep us out of danger. So the standard Russian and Israeli narrative is we are in danger. Israel's surrounded by enemies, so I get it. I don't blame them. Russia, they've been invaded all these times, so the narrative, life is dangerous, life is unsafe, better to have a strong guy in charge. It could be a leader, it could be a party, it could be a set of sort of conformist norms that you're absolutely not allowed to break. So this is what we see in the world today. So fight or flight leading to fear and conformity. Well worth flagging and then asking ourselves, hey, if I'm in fight or flight, the really tricky thing here is it becomes invisible. So if I had a shock right now, I'd feel it. My heart would race, I'd feel the blood pumping. However, when you're in a long-term fight or flight response, for example, before I treated my trauma, I just felt normal. I just got up, felt like me. My Russian friends would be like, but it is unsafe. It affects your perception and your thinking to the point where it has you. You don't realize you have it, right? It has you. Your perception is warped, your social relationships are warped, your thinking is warped, your beliefs are warped, and it's like the taste of your own mouth or the feeling of comfortable underpants you've been wearing a long time. You're habituated to that feeling of stress and trauma. You're acting from it. It's driving you, but it's normalized. And this is kind of why I'm making this video now, in that I think that's what's happened. The fight or flight, the agitation, the mistrust, the polarization. Sometimes, and there was a period last year it expressed as a kind of spaciness, like dissociation is another trauma symptom, the leaving of the body, a kind of spaciness, not spaciousness, or a kind of, it's like the feeling of fog, the feeling of not being quite there. And you'll see a lot of the sort of magical, mystical returning, like the QAnon shaman in the Capitol. This friend of mine, Rebel Wisdom, people were talking about this. I think it's a really great YouTube channel, by the way, Rebel Wisdom. if you want to look at some of the wider kind of philosophical stuff happening around this. I'm more psycho-emotional. Anyway, they were talking about the QAnon shaman, the image of this irrational, almost pagan-y kind of guy in the Senate, you know, the symbol of rationality and order. So the irrational coming back in a big way, the sort of mystical coming back in a big way. You know, we see this in society in the wider sense, and there are, you know, potentially positives there too, but dissociation isn't a good thing. So one of the main symptoms of trauma is being cut off from your body, which leads again to the ethical and moral problems I talked about, also to health problems, and also just to like a feeling of like not being quite alive, not being quite in life. There's a lot there, huh? You still breathing? Have a drink, look at my notes. In Mexico, by the way, it's quite nice here. I'm finding a nice balance between things. Okay, what have I not covered? Cultural trauma, fight, flight, great. I talked about polarization, this idea of with us or against us. There's no, like, whatever your politics, right? Is that a good thing? We see that. The media, of course, make it worse. The social media makes it even worse. The social media and the media are, you know, again, it doesn't have to be like some lizard man controlling everything. They're just financially motivated to keep us in fear, to keep us looking for the next thing. You know, it's like, well, I better check it. I better keep scrolling. And I came off social media about a month ago now. I feel so much better. It's like I was just taking this low-level anxiety-producing drug the whole time, 20, 50 times a day on my phone. So yeah, I feel so much better coming off of social media because it's just set up to make us addicted to these little hits of righteousness and simultaneously fear, and that keeps us hooked on it. The same with the media. You know how it's always like breaking news, it's never quite finished, it's always undone. Well, that's a marketing trip, the incomplete loop in the brain where you go, well what's going to happen? You want to keep, you know, tuning in 24-hour news. And again, polarization, they are motivated financially, and you can look up, there's a great documentary on Netflix about this, to keep us polarized and make us more polarized. And that, again, not my theory, there's real evidence that in the States, the US, everywhere, people have gone to extremes, and holding that healthy middle ground is so difficult, isn't it? It's so difficult to not be put in a box. You know, I got called a white nationalist supremacist the other day. It's like, are you crazy? That's so far from who I actually am. You know, it's like, I guess they read like some conservative thing I might have had an opinion on, you know, like I'm probably more conservative than some people about, I don't know, taxation or something. And it's like, they decided I was like that major extreme. You know, equally, you could probably call me a crazy social justice warrior because I'm, I don't know, working with gay people in Russia or whatever, you know? So it's the putting of people into extremes because you can't tolerate ambiguity, you can't tolerate not knowing, can't tolerate the middle ground, which is you know, a sign of that trauma response, that fight flight response, and all the empathy going offline, which on the internet happens even more. Okay, so let's look at come back to the key factor here of co-regulation. So we co-regulate through facial contact, okay? This is why when you play peekaboo with a baby, it gets a little bit anxious, then you go, hello, and it smiles, right? Because it just immediately co-regulates looking at your face. So obviously masks, again, no medical opinion for me, not an expert. Masks stop us co-regulating, all right? Stops us seeing other people's faces. Normally we see 10, 20, 30 faces a day when we're going to the shop, going about our business, whatever. And those little co-regulations just take our nervous system down. If you've ever been around people in masks, it's, you know, there's a reason like clown masks and other kinds of masks freak people out. People also have the sense of being hidden behind a mask, okay? This can make people, and there's some research on this, more likely to do immoral behavior. And I know it can feel good to feel hidden. I know it can be like, oh, I'm too much viewed. I get that feeling in myself to put on the mask and I can kind of go about my business without being seen, you know? I also had the feeling the other day, I was talking to someone in a restaurant, they had a mask on, they were standing above me and they had to raise their voice because there was music, and they're talking down with a mask and then raising their voice. And I felt really like angry and scared, like they were threatening me. And then I went, oh, it's just the setup. Okay, so I stood up, I took the guy outside, I said, okay, there's a problem with the bill in this restaurant in Miami. And we talked about it and it wasn't a big deal. Within about, I'd say 30 seconds, we'd both calmed the hell down. right? Because we'd got that physiology in place where the cues that this person wasn't an enemy, in this case it was 3 different cues, right? But the mask's one of those, okay? So when we have that cue, it's just giving the whole, I don't think people realize how fundamental this is to our psychology. We don't, yes, you can do yoga and meditation, and I do those things every day. I highly recommend those things for your regulation, but they're not the key factors for human beings, okay? Yes, they're helpful. Yes, I recommend them, but the key factors is what we do together. Togetherness. This is where choirs became popular. This is why church, where people would meet socially, would regulate people. There was ritual that would regulate people, but the most important one is just the other human being paying attention to you in a non-threatening way. Now, if they're in a fight or flight response, it will be dysregulating, right? So there's this great study of therapists trying to figure out which was the best therapy. Was it Gestalt or CBT or Freudian? And what they found was the only thing that made the difference was the quality of connection. It's actually quite astounding. Literally, the technique made 0 difference, which, given all the arguments between therapy schools, is quite astounding. It was the quality of the connection, and that's all a counsellor does, right? They don't even do a technique counselling, they just sit there and listen, as my mum does, by the way. So it's, that quality of connection has been broken a lot, by the mask. Now, what about Zoom, you might say? Okay, great. In Zoom, we're sitting still. So this is the same in a chair. When we're not moving our body, we're not feeling our body. So we numb out, right? Imagine you're in the cinema, you're sitting still, you're paying attention to something interesting, you're not feeling your body, right? When we move, we feel our body more. So when people actually had to walk to work, stand up, go over to someone's desk, stand by the water cooler, they're getting all this movement, so they're helping to feel, so helping to empathize again, feeling and empathy go together. But also they were releasing any little bits of stress through the movement. And now with Zoom, you're sitting down. Now at least you can see the face. I think there's other cues. So there's, in terms of maybe it's electromagnetic resonance, I don't want to get too woo-woo here, but there seems to be other cues that right now, for example, you're looking at me, you're getting the visual cue, I'm not wearing a mask, so you're like, it's a sort of friendly guy, smiling, hello. But you're not getting some of those more subtle cues, and you're not getting touch. So touch is vital to human health and well-being. This is absolutely established. I mean, the Romanian orphans, for example, were a really terrible example of what happens to people if you don't get touch. They had all their physical needs met, but they weren't touched, and they ended up, physically and mentally not very well at all. Touch doesn't have to be like super huggy. It can literally be a shaking hands, a pat on the back, That again regulates us. You see a dog will like put a paw on you. I remember actually I had a partner years ago in the States, and she had a half wolf, and they're almost like super dogs. And if it would sit in the middle of us and touch one of us and then touch the other one. It's kind of cute. It's like touch is this basic way of regulating, and so many people are touch deprived now. And this is not a small thing. It's not just like not nice. I've known people that have done extended retreats, for example, and they've said the lack of touch was the hardest thing about doing a retreat, not anything else. Obviously, it has an effect on immune systems. I don't know why no one's talking about this. It has a real effect on our mental health and well-being. And because of the reduced social regulation, the increased level of fight or flight, and the decreased level of touch, decreased level of other kinds of social regulation, we are now seeing massive increases in mental health issues, addictions, which is an attempt to self-regulate, to cope and compensate for the lack of self-regulation, and also acting out in unpleasant ways like, domestic violence, for example, has absolutely skyrocketed, particularly people locked down together, but it's also to do with the reduction in co-regulation. We can also say sex has been taken out for a lot of people, right? Like a lot of people have been made celibate. They've sort of effectively been put under house arrest and made celibate, which I have absolutely phenomenally strange thing that's happened that people seem to have accepted. And again, that is a major regulatory factor for a lot of people. I think it's a sort of, that could get unhealthy, but generally it's a sort of positive way people feel good. That I just got laid, I got touch, I got affection, I got love, feel good in my body. That feeling lasts a few days, doesn't it, normally? So, people just massively have less self-regulation, and this has impacts medically and physiologically. So just on the immune system stuff, this is not a weird conspiracy theory. This is the fact. And it's very hard to know, isn't it? Like, how do they balance? Has anyone ever attempted to balance those things? Equally, if people aren't outside, the next big regulatory one is nature. Okay, so again, you don't have to be a massive hippie. You all know this. You've all been swimming in the sea or gone walking in the woods, forest bathing as they call it in Japan, and felt calmer and better. Personally, for me, during the lockdown, I did a lot of barefoot walking in the park. We have a park near our house that doesn't have dogs or needles or anything. I'd walk around barefoot 2-3 hours a day. Found that incredibly useful for my self-regulation. Being in the woods, barefoot walking on the ground, and just being around trees and plants. I stroke people's dogs every chance I get. I don't think there's any infection risk there. And swimming in the sea. So even when I was in the cold in England, gives the body a shock, but it's pretty good for your immune system as far as I'm told. And it just feels good in the whole body. Obviously here in Mexico, much easier and nicer in many ways. But that being immersed in the sort of swell of nature, very regulating. We are evolved to be in nature. I mean, even a few plants around actually has an impact on people psychologically. So this is another thing that should be considered from a regulation point of view. Okay, background factors. So I've mentioned media and social media, and there we could say investment in having us dysregulated. Government and authority, and that is an investment. That is it's positive for them if we're in this state, which is bad for us. Simple as that, really. We could also kind of look at this a bit more broadly as the meaning crisis and the belief crisis. So John Vervaeke, Canadian philosopher, absolutely wonderful, talks about the meaning crisis. So meaning is regulating. If people have a great why, they can handle any what. What is the meaning in modern life? Is it just have fun? Is it fuck a lot of people and then whoever has the most money when they die wins? We've lost faith in religion. We've lost faith in society. The sort of project of either religious or civil belief has gone. So people often lack meaning. I've done a lot of work around meaning and life purpose, and it's amazing how much stress people can cope when they have meaning. So if meaning is gone for people, they've lost their jobs, they've lost their source of income, that's a big source of meaning for a lot of people. That's a real problem for the dysregulation. The Embodiment Conference, for example, was incredibly stressful, but it really meant a lot to me. It meant it was purpose life, life purpose stuff. Me and the rest of the team, we had a great team, social regulation. We actually got together in London for it. We were able to do that legally. We had this great sense of meaning and purpose. So that, it's gone for a lot of people in the modern world. And again, John Vervaeke gives you hours of stuff on this if you want to go into it. Look up the meaning crisis, and that is a background factor. Another background factor is we could just say the growth towards postmodernism. So big topic, Ken Wilber's your man here, Ken Wilber, how we've grown from a modernist society which sees things rationally to a postmodern pluralist society which kind of says, everything's good, morals relative, everything's groovy. There's some good to this stage of development of society. It started in the 60s, the body comes back online, we get a bit cynical about authority and the mainstream narratives, but there's some positive sides to that, right? I get that. I'm culturally pluralistic myself in many ways. However, it leads to this collapse of how do we know what's true? How do we know what's right and what's true? I mean, they're the two most fundamental questions. So what's true? I don't know, do I believe the media? Is it a conspiracy? Is that not a conspiracy? Do I believe this? Do I believe that? What the hell do we believe? And that is deeply anxiety provoking. And I think we've seen this postmodern trend explode into the modern world, post-truth, it's been weaponized by people like Trump and other people, but it's like, when we don't know what's true, what is the ground we stand on? That is incredibly anxiety provoking. And again, what we see is either being lost, being overwhelmed, or retreating to fundamentalism. And that might be a kind of woke fundamentalism, or it might be a religious fundamentalism, or whatever kind of conformity, whatever. Some kind of fundamentalism is the retreat from this too much ambiguity. Yeah. The same with what's good, what's right and wrong. We see the emergence of sort of religious type narratives in the QAnon or the woke or whatever it is, because it's like we've lost that. Well, there has to be some good and bad, and if people are paedophile with pizzas or something, maybe that's some sense of good and bad. what's good and bad? I don't know anymore. So that's this background, which means that everyone's fucking nuts because we don't have the shared civil religion. We don't have a shared sense of ethics anymore. This is one of the problems with postmodern pluralism is we're all mixed up together. What the hell's right and wrong? What the hell's true and untrue? So that's the context. Shit, no wonder people are stressed, with this COVID stuff on top, the life and death fear, the government's making that worse, the media and social media making that worse. And then now, and I think this is different from before, economically. So if we think in terms of a hierarchy of needs, am I going to die? There's a really base warrior base need, but not far up from that is like, do I have enough money to pay the rent? That's almost a survival need. You can survive with no money, but it's difficult, right? So many people now have lost their income. I'm fortunate enough not to be one. I'm doing okay right now. And when you're doing okay financially, it sort of gives you some space. You know what I mean? It gives you some space to go, okay, maybe I can make this spend 40 minutes making a free creative video for people just because I want to give and I want to be generous and I want to be creative and I want to think out loud. I've got space for that mentally and emotionally. And that's very difficult if you're breadline. I remember what it's like to be really poor. I grew up pretty poor. And, add to that fight or flight, for me growing up, it was the alcoholic household. Then it was the war zones. For you, it might be the stress of COVID. It might be the stress of, being stuck indoors with someone you don't get on with. It's very difficult to think because remember, fight or flight, thinking goes out the window and the empathy can go out the window. So that can lead to this polarization, this antagonism, either a conformity or an aggression. With this postmodern context, but the economics is a big part of it. And I think we're seeing that really kick off now in a way that maybe wasn't so obvious at first. People had reserves, people had hey, I'm still getting paid on furlough or whatever. So that's a wider context. Okay, blimey, still breathing? Woo, keep breathing, keep feeling your body. Stand up, have a little bit of a move and a stretch maybe. It's one of the little tricks I do when I'm online a lot. And what to do? First of all, notice your personal imbalance. Again, notice that if your heart rate or your tension levels, your jaw tension, maybe physiological symptoms like my sister gets a rash or eye teeth grind or whatever. However, as I said before, that stuff can become invisible. So notice your behaviors as well. Are you eating more sugar? That's what I found myself doing last year. Are you sleeping more or less? Are there objective measures of how you treat other people? Like, oh, that was a bit shitty. I shouldn't have said that to that poor customer service person. So looking at the objective measures, because you won't necessarily feel it, and trying to notice, are you dysregulated? Can you remember what it was like 18 months ago? Are you any different now? Do the regulatory solo practices, the meditation, loving kindness meditation, body scanning. Do the yoga. But beware of some of those. Some of those like hot yoga and hardcore stuff can be more. You've got a choice. Do you go to the hardcore stuff? Like I really enjoyed getting rid of my fight response by doing Krav Maga and hitting pads like boxing. I loved going to that extreme. And there was a time when I needed that, and there was a time when I needed like Qigong, slow down, Tai Chi. So pick those practices intelligently rather than let your neurosis pick the practice, because the neurosis could say, if you're dissociated, to do something really spacey, and if you're hyper-aroused, to do something really intense. Not necessarily the best way, though. You can work with this curve of going up to go down. That's what I do with the Wim Hof breathing, for example. You get quite tense as you're holding your breath, and then you release afterwards, and you can relax. So do that stuff, and then maximize your social regulation in whatever way is safe for you. So again, no medical advice, I'll say it again, in case I get taken off the internet, and I'm just not qualified. But the key thing is to balance what your conclusion is about what's safe medically. And I think everybody comes to their own line, with that. And I'm a big believer we should come to our own, look at the evidence base, look at the trusted people. Like I phone my friend Dr. Rob and my cousin Dr. Louise and get their advice, and then I make my choice. But one of the factors in your choice shouldn't just be what Dr. Louise or Dr. Rob says, because they're going to give a medical perspective. I want to factor in the psychosocial, emotional, political in those choices. And that might look like bubbling with a couple of people. It might look like having a hug buddy. It might, say, actually I'm an at-risk group. I can't afford to do that, but I'm going to make sure I do face-to-face calls every day. I'm going to make sure I join a choir and sing, even if I'm not touching people, whatever it is, okay? How do you regulate yourself socially as well as you can, given the medical constraints that you decide? And I think that autonomy in you deciding is itself empowering. Even if it's, I decide to go along with everything my government says. That autonomy is key here, that we're not, that way we know we're not in blind conformity. So it might be like, you know what, I'm gonna wear a mask, it doesn't hurt me, no big deal. I'll wear a mask, I've looked into it, fine. Yeah, okay, but you decide. That's the key here. Get your agency back here, because the loss of agency, while it might be, it is beneficial to those in authority, right, is not beneficial to your well-being. Agency is a key well-being factor, absolutely key. Loads of studies on this. So get your autonomy back, make a decision based in the medical, but also the psychological and the social, political, and then you make a choice as to what's best for you. I'm not going to tell you where that line is. You're a 70-year-old pensioner in England, it's very different than if you're a 15-year-old somewhere where there isn't any COVID, yeah? Great, look for meaning in your life, find the meaning. I personally make meaning through my company, doing embodied work, even just doing stuff like this, make meaning, so that's a foundation. Spend time in nature. I would be highly resistant to any regulation that didn't allow me to do this, even if it was in a solo form, lying on the ground, swimming in the sea, walking in the countryside, whatever it is. Absolutely essential to our well-being. So I'd say be very, very cautious of bringing, no nature into your equation, okay? What else? Trauma work. So I just did my TRE shaking, that's trauma releasing exercises. David Baselli, I like that a lot. That's a very accessible form of trauma release. Some people like tapping, somatic experiencing. Now, there's many trauma modalities, different things work for different people. Some things seem to make things worse for some people, but do the trauma work. I like the trauma releasing exercises personally, so I recommend that. You can find about that online. Zoom, watch out for how much screen time you have every day. Make sure you're moving. I like to have moving calls. I walk around the room while on calls. This is a long time for me to be sat down, by the way, 40 minutes. And make those choices. Resist polarization. Notice when you make people other. Notice when you demonize people. It might be like, they're just a social justice warrior, they're just a far-right neo-Nazi. It's like, notice when you dehumanize the other. Are you still able to listen? If you're not able to listen, you've again, that goes out the window of fight or flight. If you're not able to listen, you're not having a conversation, you're just shouting at someone. Are you able to paraphrase, like test it? So what your view is it this? Am I right? Are you able to see the humanity? So, I don't agree with that stance on, abortion, but I get it. I get why you would say that. I don't think you're mad or bad or crazy. There's the sort of the three, what is it? Usually just mad or bad, actually, just use those. I don't think you're crazy to be a Republican. So I got an example of this, right? I used to think anyone that likes guns in America is just crazy. Like, I come from a sort of place about guns kill people, you're crazy. I was in Texas doing a yoga thing, got tired of being around the yogis. One of them said, hey, go with my husband to the gun range. And I thought, well, when in Texas, and I went with him and we shot a bunch of guns. It was tremendous fun. And, it was all safe. He seemed very intelligent guy, He was the husband of my yoga teacher friend. And I really got his point of view. And I went, you know what, don't think guns should be legal in the UK, but I get why you like them. I don't think you're stupid and I don't think you're evil. I think you have a different point of view to me. And that was an experience that did that. But, noticing are you in that place with people you disagree with? Noticing if you're regulated yourself, if you're not breathing, you shouldn't be in conversation. Minimizing media. I look at the BBC maximum 10 minutes a day. Quickly go on and see what's happening in my home country. Minimizing your social media. As I said, I now regard social media as very toxic. So minimizing that. Noticing if I'm getting polarized input. So YouTube, which I still use a lot, will suggest, all this kind of polarized stuff to me. And I deliberately sort of go searching. I message my friends and say, hey, can you recommend something? Yeah, so there's some of the things I'd recommend. We could go into like existential, looking at, the nature of death and, meaning making in the modern world. Look at the stuff on stages of development, look at the stuff on meaning making, the stuff out there. Recommend Ken Wilber, John Vervaeke, my friends at Rebel Wisdom, shout out to Dave. Yeah, all that stuff is a good background. And the body-mind stuff, the embodiment stuff, super useful, super helpful, and let's see it within this big context. Fucking hell, 45 minutes. Well, if you made it this far, thank you, well done. I'll see you around, and I hope this has been of service to people. Just made this spontaneously today. I thought really from the heart, it was something I needed to say. So I hope there's been some gift here for you.